I just wanted to say thank you for everyone who is able to come. I know that you're all doing some work on the Early Literacy Council or supporting that work for your agency. And so I just really appreciate you taking the time. As you know, TSPC has sort of a unique role in Oregon. And so we, from time to time, need to reach out to other states to hear what is going on for them. And so we were able to connect with a few other states to talk about their early literacy initiatives and how they're supporting educator preparation and what that relationship really looked like. And so we have the opportunity to chat today with some representatives from Utah, Massachusetts, and Colorado. And I'll let Wayne take over and have folks introduce themselves. But if you have questions, you can put them in the chat and I'll compile them for the panel. Wayne, you're muted.
Good morning, everybody. And I want to add my welcome to you, especially those of you that are sharing with us from out of state. We're very interested in hearing from you, anything that you can do to help us as we navigate through this process ourselves. You may know that our newly elected governor has put together an executive order and established a council, and several of the people that you see on the screen are part of that executive council. TSPC, Teacher Standards and Practices Commission in Oregon, is responsible for putting together program standards and licensing standards for the educator prep programs in the state. And several, if not all of those staff that work together with Kristen and I are here today. I think what we'll do is we'll take a minute and just go ahead and introduce first of all, the staff, and then secondly, allow you to introduce yourselves. And then lastly, I'll introduce those who are our special guests that we've invited today. I want to begin by having you meet our executive director, who is with us here this morning, Melissa Goff. So, Melissa. Well, she was here. You already met Kristen Rush. Kristen also works in our Educator Preparation and Pathways unit. I believe Kirsten Plumo, are you here?
Hi, good morning, I'm here.
Okay, great. And then Susan Bowe. Okay, I see Rochelle Krotz.
I am Rochelle Krotz, the Educator Preparation Liaison for the EP&P unit.
Okay. And next, let's go ahead and maybe just have those of you who are part of the Governor's Executive Council, Early Literacy Preparation Council. Let's go ahead and have you introduce yourselves. And just go ahead, if you can get the attention of the rest of us, just go ahead and.
I am Rhonda Fritz. I'm faculty at Eastern Oregon University and co-chair of the council. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And I am Representative Boomer Wright from the beautiful Oregon coast on the council.
Thank you, Rep. Wright.
Good morning, Sarah Spencer. I'm the interim executive director of the Educator Advancement Council and also part of the Governor's Council on Early Literacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Hi, I'm Katie Danielson from the University of Portland, who's also a member of the council.
Thank you, Katie. Anyone else? Lastly, let's thank Amanda. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name's Amanda Kibler. I'm a professor at Oregon State University, and I am standing in today for Dean Gardner, who is a co-chair of the council with Rhonda. So nice to see you all.
Great. Thank you. Let me go ahead and introduce or have you introduce yourselves, our specially invited guests. First, we have Sarah Wiebke. Sarah?
It's a tricky one. That was great. Yes, Sarah Wibke. I'm the Early Learning and Literacy Coordinator for the Utah State Board of Education. So nice to meet all of you. And Mary, nice to see you again since we just saw each other in Nashville yesterday.
Oh,
I'll just take that and jump in then, Wayne.
okay, you go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, Sarah and I were just talking about reading yesterday at CCCS network meeting, or CCSSO. Ooh, got to get my letters right. Hi, everybody. I'm Mary Bivens. I'm the Executive Director of the Educator Workforce Development Unit at the Colorado Department of Education. Nice to be here and looking forward to sharing what's going on in Colorado.
Great, thank you. And then we have with us Siobhan. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm a literacy specialist within the Office of Educator Effectiveness in Massachusetts.
Great. Is there anybody that I've missed?
My colleague Claire.
Oh, Claire, I forgot Claire. I'm sorry.
No worries. Hi, everyone. I'm Claire Abbott. I'm the Director of the Office of Educator Effectiveness. Hi, Mary. Nice to see you.
Great. You guys have been busy because I know you just had a set of meetings that you just finished up. So thank you for coming. Well, what I want to do is go ahead and ask you a series of questions. And we really want to learn as much as we can from you as we're going through this process ourselves. I think we are tasked with coming up with at least a tentative framework for our program standards for early literacy by December. So we've been moving along, and then in March, we're going to put together some licensure standards. So let me go ahead and just begin with you, Sarah. And Sarah, if you would briefly describe your agency and what your role is in the agency as related to educator preparation.
Yes, absolutely. Our agency typically is more over, the preschool through 12 space. But we do have in our literacy bill a space around improving higher education. And so that was really sort of the impetus into moving into that space and providing support. With that, we were able to actually hire a specialist who is specifically working with all of our higher ed teacher prep groups that we have in Utah. And so she's been here, I think, less than a year, maybe almost a year. So she hasn't been very long on the team, but it's great to have someone to really focus on that work and support them. But she's been working with them on, like, what does your syllabus look like? Tell me about your classes. What texts are you using? Asking a lot of questions. She's also providing them with data. So it's been a great start to the collaborative group and the support that we're going to put in place. And so in that, we do have, because it was in state code, we have rulemaking authority to make rules around what needs or doesn't need to change within the higher ed space.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Claire, how about you? What's your role within the agency that you serve?
So Siobhan and I work in the Office of Educator Effectiveness, but and that office oversees all of the standards for educator effectiveness from preparation up through employment. So like the two biggest levers we have are our formal review processes for all of our teacher preparation programs, and then extending into employment, the statewide educator evaluation standards that we set and oversee. So I think that we're very lucky that that all of that resides within one office, and our office itself sits within the Center for Instructional Support, which is where all of our content-specific frameworks and curriculum frameworks reside. So Siobhan and I literally walk down the hall and work closely with our STEM, ELA, world languages colleagues. So there's really a nice intersection between the standards we set for educator effectiveness and the content-specific standards. So literacy kind of sits very well within that structure here at the department.
Great, thank you very much. Chiffon, anything you want to add to what your colleague has stated?
No, she covered it.
Okay, great. And then finally, we have Mary. Mary, tell us about Colorado.
Yeah, very much like Claire's system, our division is called Educator Talent, and we have the whole umbrella of the talent pieces. So pre-service, recruitment, induction, preparation, induction, hiring, licensing, educator effectiveness, all of those in our talent division. And that's where I'm heavily over 4 of those offices. And then, but we work super closely with around the reading initiatives with what I would call our teaching and learning colleagues over the academic pieces. We have a whole office in Colorado that was created based off of the Colorado READ Act, which is our major piece of legislation around this initiative. And it's been around for a long time and has had iterations. So we have a whole team beyond just our normal instructional and standards team that we work very closely with for the in-service folks while we're thinking about the pre-service folks in talent. I would say we, just like Claire, have full authority over all standards for preparation, all authorization, reauthorization of preparation programs in the state. We have over 50 programs. So all of that lives with us. Colorado does not have a standards board. And so the full authority for approval of programs sits with our department, with our State Board of Education that we report to in the department.
Thank you. I want to interrupt our discussion here because I see that our executive director is here, and I want to introduce her to you, Melissa Goff. So I know she was probably in another meeting, and that's why she wasn't here right at the very beginning, but we're just excited to have you here as well. So anything?
Thanks. I was actually, my Zoom wasn't working, so I kept logging in and having to log out, and my camera wouldn't see. So sorry, I'm late.
Okay, great. Well, it's nice to have you here. So drilling down, the reason why we wanted to have a conversation with each of you is that we believe that you guys have been working very intensely with early literacy initiatives, and you've mentioned, some of you have mentioned that, and I think you are ahead of us in terms of Oregon. And so we wanted to kind of glean as much as we could, pick your brains with regard to your role in the work. So first of all, I wanted to ask you, and some of you have already addressed this issue, but how did you organize the your initiative to focus on early literacy? Was there anything special that you did organizationally to get that started? And so again, I'm going to start with you, Sarah. I'm going to start with you each time. So you ready?
I appreciate the heads up. Thank you. As far as sort of how we came into this space, I would say it started back prior to COVID. And really what we did is we noticed that our data was stagnant for some time, several years really. And we just said, let's try some things. We tried some sort of like, it wasn't called a literacy boot camp, but very similar to what I've seen other states put in place of like a summer boot camp, or like maybe that will be it, or an ongoing piece where it was like, you can come see us in November, come see us in January, come, like an ongoing professional learning. That didn't move the mark. We had 3 different reading endorsements in the state. We thought that would move the mark. It did not. So we tried several things. So we finally just put out a survey statewide to every single elementary teacher, every single literacy coach, and every single school leader in the elementary space in our state. And the responses, actually, we had 60% of our educators actually respond, which we thought was pretty amazing. We did push it pretty hard because we wanted really great data. And then we also offered focus groups around the state to just find out, how's everyone feeling about early literacy? And really what we found was interesting, because the connections that we were able to make between what the teachers were reporting, the coaches were reporting, and the school leaders were reporting were very similar. And basically what came out of it is they said, we don't really know how to teach these foundational skills. We do our best, but I don't feel like I know how to teach kids how to read. So we had made some assumptions that that was possible based on like the, boot camps that we had run and everything, and the questions that were coming up and all of those things. So it was nice to have actual solid data saying, we don't think we know what we're doing. And that was, really enlightening, and we appreciate their honesty in that space. We also realized that even literacy coaches and school leaders feel like they're just faking until they make it, and they hadn't made it, so to speak. So that was great. And what they really said they needed was professional learning, really in structured literacy and the science of reading, those types of things, and that they needed to be ongoing. Coaching needed to be provided, all of the pieces that we know good professional learning looks like. And so with all of that said, we started with a bill, and we started working, and this is back in 2019 when we started this, and really talked to higher ed and said, can you please join us for a group? And of course, not everyone chose to come, which is fine. But we just said, here's the results from a survey. Here are the state results for our student outcomes on a variety of assessments, and just said, this isn't good enough. And we're pretty sure you think the same. And we have teachers telling us that they don't feel like they come out of college or whatever their prep program was prepared. And we want to change that space with all of you. And so we started that way. As you can imagine, it was a little rocky to start because they didn't really love hearing that. Just like anybody would. But there were some awesome leaders in the room that were willing to say, this isn't good enough and we can do better. I know we can do better. Will you come with me? And so with that support of some really strong leadership in the higher ed space, we were able to have a bill that talked about how we're going to measure it. We ran an RFP. It came out to the Foundations of Reading assessment, and we will be setting a cut score this spring, but we've been running a 3-year pilot. The first year was they weren't required. It was an optional pilot, and we had a few universities opt in. And then the last 2 years, we wanted to gather data from everybody. So that will help to inform where we think that cut score will be at. But during this time, we have also been very transparent with all of the universities and our legislators and our board members, and saying this is where we're at, and sharing the data of the passing of the national cut score that the Foundations of Reading assessment has. And with that, I think it was an eye-opener for our universities to say, okay, this is where we're at. We finally have a baseline, because I feel like that was really important, and they needed that information to really move forward. It did create a little bit of competition, which hopefully it's a healthy set of competition. But that's been really where we've been working in that space since. And then that passed in 2020, but then of course that was the COVID year, so we didn't actually get funding until 2021. So it was a little bit of a rough start there. And then in 2022, we passed our big piece of legislation that had 26 different projects, and about 7 of those are in the higher ed space. So it's a big lift, a very comprehensive bill. And now we're moving in that direction with, like I said, establishing those cut scores, which is sort of a piece of that, but also teachers will have to pass coming out of whatever teacher preparation that is, which it could be a university, it could be, we have Apple programs that are sort of they used to be called an alternate route to licensure in our state. You guys probably have another name. But any candidate coming out, if they are in preschool, elementary, or special education or early childhood licensing, then if they want that license, they have to pass the assessment. The big piece that was in legislation, though, the new legislation from 2022, was really around, we need to establish some exemptions and develop a pathway to demonstrate competency if they can't pass the Foundations of Reading assessment. And so that's something that we're working on right now. We have teacher prep competencies. We also have that universities have to support that candidate for up to 3 other attempts to pass the assessment. And there's no funding to do that. It's just sort of an unfunded mandate. But the other pieces within the bill were around splitting some of the state of institutions, higher education, and university prep programs a 75-25 split, so we can assist in them hiring an extra person on their staff who has the foundations of science of reading. We would put someone on their interview committee to support in that space and know what to look for, support them in creating rubrics and that sort of thing. And so those were some support pieces. We didn't want it to feel like this is just a big heavy hand, that we wanted to provide support within that space. And so those are some of the things that we've put in place so far.
Great. Thank you so much. Wow. A lot of really helpful strategies that you used and are using. I want to ask the same question, Claire, of you and Siobhan, about your initiative and how did you structure that, and how far along are you actually in that process?
So we are a bit different in the approach we took in Massachusetts because we don't have a legislative mandate or requirement to move forward with this early literacy initiative, either in prep or in our K-12 space. So we've been sort of building the plane as we fly it, but driven in large part by 20 years of stagnant student outcome data with 20 years of increasing gaps, the racial and ethnic gaps in reading outcomes. So there was a definite urgency to it. And the first thing that happened in the state was the launch in 2018 of what we call mass literacy, which is our pre-K to 3 literacy initiative that reset sort of expectations and standards for teaching reading and literacy in general for our pre-K to 3 students. The next big step was to bring that to prep. And the first thing that we did, we sort of leveraged the levers that we have. And the first thing we did was we updated our Foundations of Reading licensure assessment. And that updated assessment was released in 2021. At that same time, we started to develop a strategic plan around early literacy in our teacher preparation licensure programs, specifically early childhood, elementary, and moderate disabilities. And we worked with an advisory team that included representatives from our prep field as well as our K-12 field. And we made the decision to really center our goal around program review. So Mary alluded to this as well. That's kind of our biggest lever, is our ability to go in, review, and essentially accredit our teacher prep and licensure programs. So we made the decision pretty early on to use our program review lever as the primary mechanism to enforce new expectations around early literacy in teacher prep. And we spent the next year, the 22-23 year, developing program review criteria for those licensure programs. And those really became the launching pad for everything else we developed. We developed observation tools for student teachers in their practicum aligned to those criteria. We developed guidance around how to ensure that equitable and culturally responsive practices are woven into those criteria. And just right this moment, the final draft of those criteria are out for public comment, formal public comment, and they will become finalized in January, and they will drive our program approval processes going forward. And I will just give a huge shout out to Colorado because we have, I feel like we're about 1 to 2 years behind them, and we have taken every page out of their book, lessons learned, and we're very grateful for the many phone calls and thought partnership that Mary and her team have given us. So Mary can tell you where we're going based on where Colorado already is at this point in time.
Great. Siobhan, anything you want to add?
Well, I would just say that in the development of the program approval criteria that Claire just mentioned, we reached out and really leaned into all of the national experts that we could possibly count on, including Mary, as well as others, and their expertise and their thoughtful input on the criteria really helped shape direction of the document, which was. And then, as Claire mentioned earlier, we're situated within the Center of Instructional Support, and so we have within our center so many content experts being able to like see how the criteria that we're creating now for teacher prep will play out in public school settings.
Wonderful. And I take it you're one of those content experts that was brought on for that purpose.
This is a strategic move. We hired Siobhan as a literacy content expert to sit in our prep team. So it was a very intentional integration of a content specialist in our teacher prep team, because we knew that would be essential to building buy-in and to ensuring that the criteria that we were developing would be grounded in evidence.
Great, thank you. And just as Claire was giving a shout out to Mary and Colorado, we want to give a shout out to all of you for just the information and the counsel that you're giving us right now. And so Mary, I think probably you are very far along in this process.
Yeah.
And so we'd like to hear from you as well.
Well, thank you so much. It's shocking to say, but what started this process was a bill from 2012. So the first bill was in 2012. So this was legislatively driven, but much like Claire said, it came from, at that time, 10, 15 years of stagnant data on that our students were not reading on grade level by the end of third grade, and all the research that was coming out in the 2000s and just the devastation of what that meant for their future. So I think that drove it. The data, student achievement across the state drove it. The first legislation, called the Colorado READ Act, and was again in 2012, and it and I'll link to that if anybody, the main webpage, you can get a million resources on there, but it really focused on our districts and what identifying students' needs early. So the legislation was all about, it provided money to districts to get resources and people and training, whatever they would need. But it really focused on making sure that there was benchmarking assessments, interim assessments, interventions for students who weren't reading, and requirements about statewide read plans, that students were put on these plans, and us at the State Department having this data to see what was really going on with our students and again, giving resources to the local area. Fast forward from that 2012 legislation to, maybe a year later when things started getting implemented at the local level. 5 years later, we're seeing the same flat data statewide and it was a lot of money going to districts. So legislators in about 2018 started circling back on this conversation and saying, wait a minute, why aren't we seeing an impact? And so we knew new updated legislation to the READ Act was coming in a big way, like big things. It was all being discussed. So at the same time, at the State Department level, in 2018, my office was getting a directive from our state board, which again, our state board is who we report to. Our department isn't under the governor. So just for that structure, it became a critical strategic area in our strategic plan. And I was directed to start doing deep dives into preparation, right? Because not only was it what's going on with our current teachers, but we've been preparing teachers for the last 6 years. Why aren't we seeing a difference with our new teachers coming in with better strategies to teach children how to read? We changed our preparation standards to be very 100% science of reading standards in the May of 2016. And there was it wasn't balanced approach. It wasn't symphonics. It was 100% science of reading or scientifically based reading standards for our preparation programs in the same areas that Sarah said: early childhood, elementary, special ed, or any combination thereof. And so 2 years later, when this was all bubbling, both with the state board and knowing new legislation was coming, we took it upon ourselves to start doing a deep dive in the reauthorization process when we go to our preparation programs. As Claire said, for me, that was a huge lever in the talent world. And so we did our first deep dive 5 years ago this month, November 2018. It didn't go well. And so what we found was, and it was our largest university. And I will just say, to keep it concise, because I could do a whole presentation on the process we use, and that's what we are willing to share and have shared with other colleagues. But we do we take content experts. We're doing deep review of primary text, syllabi, auditing classes, talking and visiting with recent graduates, with our principals, our instructional coaches, talking to current candidates, just about reading. We talk to them about the whole program, of course, in preparation, but we're doing extra deep conversations about their ability to speak to and know scientifically based reading instruction. And what we saw right away at a way too large percentage of our programs, again, 2 years after, a minimum of 2 years after the standards went in place, was that they were not getting fully trained on scientifically based reading instruction. There was still a very heavy balanced approach to literacy, as it's commonly referred to. There was actually contrary practices or trying to debunk science of reading, even though that was in our preparation standards. So we realized very quickly that while my colleagues were deeply trying to support our schools and all that needed to happen to grow there, we had a job and a responsibility to focus on preparation. In the last 5 years, 3 programs have sunset themselves because they could not meet the standards. 7 programs have been put on conditional reauthorization, which gives them just a year to get in alignment, or they will no longer be able to admit candidates. So again, very shorthandedly, we did take a heavy-handed approach. We did. I just want to say that out loud. We use that lever. We have seen drastic improvements, and NCTQ's reports validate what we're seeing on the ground. We went from the middle of the pack in those grade reports for all of our institutions to leading the nation. We only have 2 programs who were receiving a C grade, and they were under conditional reauth at the time. So it completely aligned with what we were seeing in our deep dives, with what external people were seeing. At the same time, we did a lot of things that Sarah described. We were working with our preparation programs. We were offering professional development. We were doing symposiums around the research to address concerns around this work related to ELs and MLs, multi-language learners. We were offering communities of practice with experts from across the nation to our faculty. So we were doing all those things, but I want to be very clear that we also took advantage of the levers. The big legislation that came down in 2019 really heavily impacted the academic side, still did not address anything in preparation, didn't have one line about educator preparation in the updated 2019 bill. But it created mandatory training for every teacher in Colorado who teaches any student 3rd grade or under. So special ed, interventionists, classroom teachers, librarians, it didn't matter. If you teach literacy to a 3rd grade or under student, there was a mandatory training that had to happen at the state level. Mandatory curriculum. You could only use these curriculum. Colorado, like many other states, we don't get in those games. We've never been in that at the Department of Ed. So that legislation brought heavy-handed changes to, if you want the money, districts that we've been giving you to improve reading, here's what you have to align to. So since that legislation passed in 2019, there's been significant changes in our actual school and school buildings. Due to those mandatory training requirements and content. Lucy Calkins was widely used, if anybody knows instructional materials in Colorado. And that was immediately, banned from being used in Colorado. So that's been big work on that side. In 2020, there was a third piece of legislation, a little bit smaller, mostly came into effect because of our work with preparation. They finally added in a line or two about preparation to codify in legislation. Again, we already had state board mandates, state board rules that we could hold our programs accountable, but it codified it in statute, including the process of the status of conditional reauthorization, which was a brand new thing that only came about because of this work around reading. Before, we didn't have that ability to put a program on and give them just a year to improve. And that got codified in statute because of the work we were doing around this. So.
Well, thank you very much. Wow. That's quite impressive. I'm going to ask two more questions. One is I'd like you to drill down specifically, and you've already answered some of this, but I'd like you to drill down specifically on the role that the EPPs played and how challenging, how easy was that to get them involved. And then secondly, I'd like to have you respond to what do you recommend that we make sure we include as we move forward? What are the things that worked well for you? What is maybe one or two of the most significant things that you did? And what would you recommend that we not do? What are some things you hope we will avoid doing as we're moving forward with this? And again, Sarah, I'm going to let you go first, even though I can't see you right now on the screen. I'm going to let you go first and share with us Utah and their experience. Oh, there you are. Yes.
Right. So I mentioned already that we started with a group and we invited people from early prep from every single university, because we wanted them to know, like, we welcome you. We want you to be a part of this, but it's optional. It's your choice. We're not going to force you to come, but if you want to be a part of this shift, this movement, we would love to have you. And really, when we shared the data, we shared all things, it was a heated room, you could say. So in thinking about your other questions around what we could have done better, I think it would have been to reach out to some key colleagues that we already had worked with on like endorsement courses, and just some key colleagues within certain universities that we already had a relationship with, to say, hey, will you be like up with us? Will you stand with us up there? Will you help present? Will you be a part of this? I think it would have been better received had there been someone from the higher ed space standing alongside of us, saying we're doing this as people who want to do better for kids, which is obviously the ultimate goal. Yeah. And I think so that was a lesson learned for us. We did, when the 2022 bill went through and was being drafted, I should say, there were 3 people that we had that were specifically called upon to be part of the committee to draft that bill. So we wanted to make sure that they were included within that space, and in asking them, what do you think will move the needle? What do you think will get higher ed on board? Some of the levers that we included, other than what I've talked about, were we are developing a system of support for programs that if they have a low passing rate on the Foundations of Reading assessment for 2 consecutive years. So if they are basically showing no movement, things aren't changing, they're going to be seeing and hearing from us more, which I'm sure they'd like to avoid that. But we wanted it, again, to be providing support at first, and then knowing, after speaking with a group of representatives, it sounds like they would kind of, like Mary was sharing, opt out then of being part of teacher prep if they continued down that road. I think they would just make that decision on their own at that point. We haven't gotten there yet, so we'll find out in a year or 2 how that actually goes, but I sense that's what would probably happen. We also have been very public about their scores for the passing rate for the Foundation of Reading assessment, and I actually pulled them up because I wanted to be able to mention them with all of you. But with that, we have the lowest. We have 2 universities that are at 46% passing rate. And they're 2 of our big teacher prep universities. And then we have 3 that are between 75 and 70% passing rate. So that's, or 75 and 77% passing rate. So the state average of all of our teacher prep programs combined is 61%. And we already have one that they're sort of talking about opting out already, just instantly, like, nah, I don't want to be a part of this. So I think that will be a move for them. We'll see how it goes. One of them being Western Governors, and I don't know, Mary, if you have educators that are partaking in that, because it's in Utah, but it's online, so anyone can partake in it.
Right.
But that has been interesting, and we shared that data. People were pretty taken aback with where we're at after having run a bill.
Yeah.
And having met with them in 2019. So I think they were like, oh, we really haven't come that far in kind of a long time, in a few years. So there were some pieces like that. And I think the other piece would be, as far as thinking about improvement, I will say this. I love what Mary said about the heavy hand works. We felt like the first time things really started to move was when we went public with their data. And the one person actually on the committee called it the shame scenario. Let's just try it. And I was like, oh, okay. And we did, and it turned out it does cause a fire under people. In learning mode, I think we could have done better. One other component would be when we hired someone to support, we should have made sure that they had experience working in a teacher prep.
Yeah, you don't get it here.
Excuse me.
No, you're good. Because the person had a ton of background in early literacy and a lot in that space, but hadn't ever been like a professor in a university. And so the respect wasn't automatic and still isn't there for some. So the relationship building has been a little bit more of a hurdle in some spaces. And that's something that we could have done better.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
As I reflect on what you've said, one of the things I think we did well is that we have 2 co-chairs over the council, and they both are at EPPs. So they're educators that are, in one case at least, is working in this particular area itself. So I'm very grateful that happened. And I think that one of the things that I also want to say is it had not dawned on me that the consequence of this movement might be that we lose some of our EPPs. And we only have 14 active EPPs right now, and we have extreme shortages in educators. So, I mean, that's kind of a sad thing to see that people will decide not to do it. But I guess that's the consequences of having these higher expectations and demands. I want to go now to Massachusetts and just have you share a little bit about the role of the EPPs. And if you could expound on that a little bit, what do you recommend are the best things that you did, and what are some things that you would counsel us not to do?
Well, I actually think the point you just made, Wayne, is really important, that you only have 14 EPPs and a teacher shortage, because I was just sort of chatting with Siobhan, and I said, local context really matters. And the decisions that we made in Massachusetts were very reflective of the local context in Massachusetts. We know we have over 40% of districts using Lucy Calkins and units of study. We know Fontes and Pennell is deeply ingrained as an assessment in our schools. And we have over 60 EPPs. So frankly, and I don't mean this, I don't want to cause people to shut down, but that's not something we're super worried about.
Yeah.
So our decision to move forward with program review as a primary lever reflects that context. So I just want to acknowledge that.
Thank you.
The other thing that I'll say is that we were very, very transparent and public about our initiative from the very beginning. We set a goal in 2022 that we published on our website that we said by 2024, all educators in these 3 licensure areas will be prepared in accordance with evidence-based early literacy instruction. We published the draft program review criteria in draft form a year before we ever put them out for formal public comment. So that it would come as no surprise to people what we were signaling, be the new expectations. And so they lived with that for a year, and we provided no cost, free formative feedback reviews to any organization that chose to take us up on that. So we kind of made it hard to not know what was going on. We made it hard to not take advantage of opportunities to get ahead of the game. And then I'm going to turn over to Siobhan to talk about how we involved the EPPs themselves.
So that would be my overarching biggest recommendation for any state engaging in this work is that you need to make sure that you're engaging with a diverse group of stakeholders. So for our goals, our program approval criteria was focused on early childhood, elementary, and moderate disability licensure programs. And so we wanted to make sure that we had folks from each one of those programs part of the conversation, part of the drafting process for what the program approval criteria would look like. And so we collaborated specifically with one sponsoring organization, a university, to draft the initial early literacy program approval criteria. And then we held a working group of 8 different sponsoring organizations to get them to help us revise and really hone in on what they thought was important for teachers to know about early literacy instruction on day 1 in the classroom. And then also, we made sure that we were reaching out to PK-12 folks. Like, what is it as a teacher in a preschool through 3rd grade classroom that you really wish you had known, that you wish that your teacher prep program had prepared you to be able to do? And so really making sure that you have that diverse perspective matters. And then I would also say that reaching out to folks who have expertise in multilingualism and bidialectalism is also key, I think, to promoting buy-in. We know that as we have been on this journey for the last couple of years, the perceived battle between multilingualism and early literacy instruction that's evidence-based has been a real roadblock for us in some cases. And so kind of making sure that we're addressing that the needs of multilingual learners can also be part of any plan that you have for early literacy instruction, I think.
Thank you.
Siobhan literally picked up the phone and called our biggest naysayers and had conversations with them.
Yeah.
So,
thank you. Well, I appreciate that offer to pick up the phone and call her. We may be calling all of you at times as we are moving along in this process. And Mary, I've been told that I was given a 10-minute warning, and actually now it's 9 minutes. But I'm wondering, can you wrap it up in about 5 minutes in terms of Colorado?
Absolutely.
And I'm especially interested in the financial incentives that you offered, that you mentioned to the EPP. So go ahead and share with us about your what you think worked well and what you think you would recommend that we not do.
Yeah. So first, the financial money from the legislation went to districts, nothing for EPP. So I just want to take that off the table.
Okay.
But the second thing I would say, I want to double down on a couple things. I think you have to lean in. You have to lean into the conversations to say, there's no more reading wars. All the standards in the state are aligned. It's all scientifically based reading standards for students, for prep programs, for to what Claire talked about, to how we evaluate our teachers going forward in educator effectiveness. everything needs to be in alignment. If you have if your governance structure is a standards board, you can't have the standards board standards different than what the State Department is doing for authorization, right? Everything has to be in alignment. So I think that's first and foremost. It may seem obvious, but I talk to many colleagues across the nation who are struggling with those inconsistencies. The second thing I would say is leaning in hard to some of the difficult conversations. We've both said it here, the conversation about ELs and MLs related to scientifically based reading and instruction, especially in your state if you have a high rate like we do in Colorado, has to be addressed. It took a couple of years, but I feel like we kept leaning into it. We got the research, we got the national experts. You know, we said it's not one or the other. It is scientifically based with what our ELs and MLs need. I think the other thing we had to lean into is that scientifically based, or the science of reading, isn't about intervention. This is about core tier 1 instruction. When the first grade teacher is in front of 30 first graders, again, you think that's evident, but it wasn't in our prep programs. Our prep program was saying, our candidates were saying, oh yeah, they told us about that, but the interventionists would do that, you know, if they can't read in 4th grade. And it's like, no, you know, so that's one of the reasons, if you look at the research, we probably weren't seeing the shifts, even in our prep programs that had this embedded after 2016. They were going to schools that were then using Fontes and Pinnell and Lucy Calkins, so they were losing what they had been trained on. They weren't implementing it. So, you know, that's why we saw stagnant data, why we weren't seeing the improvements, even though we had an original legislation in 2012. That was more about identifying students. The 2019 brought in the heavy-handed, hey, people need to be trained. We need to look at what curriculum we're using. That's why we're not moving the needle. So I think we're saying the same thing in preparation. People had embedded some phonics. They embedded it as an option. This is one way to teach reading. Here's another way to teach reading. Here's another way to teach reading. And the candidates were walking out with little to no knowledge of teaching anything, right? They were just confused. So I think, you know, all of those things coming together, you've got to be consistent. You've got to engage all the stakeholders. You've got to know what you're asking programs to be able to do. And what does that look like? And how will we know it? Not just the passage rate. I agree with Sarah. We looked at all of those, but that's not enough. We had programs that had passage rates at the 70% level, and we went in and talked to their candidates, and those candidates were struggling. They knew enough to pass the exam at a decent rate, but they couldn't turn around and really teach these standards. So we chose to start looking at multiple levels of outcomes from preparation programs to get the full authorization. And the last thing I would say is related to the 3 programs that we had sunset. Two of them were alternative programs, and those candidates were immediately embedded. They're still doing alternative candidates, but they're doing a different program that had the capacity to take this on. What I think a prep program has to say, Sarah brought it up philosophically, but beyond philosophically, because we said, well, if you want an approved licensure program, there's really no debate about your philosophy. The state standards are the state standards, and you will have to test them as written with the outcomes we expect. But I think the other shift is, do you have the people on your staff, your faculty, your leadership who understand this? And I will say without question, all 7 programs that were put on conditional reauthorization because of their reading content over the last 5 years, every single one of them did increased content, took out contrary conversations, switched primary textbooks that they were using with their candidates, and redistributed their faculty of what they were teaching, and most often hiring on a faculty member who actually knows science of reading. So all of those were trends that we saw across all programs that struggled. But remember, we have 50 prep programs. We only put 7 on conditional. 3 only sunset. So many of our programs were there. And when we started doing the deep dive, they actively reached out, as Sarah said, wanting to say, well, wait, are we there? We think we're there. And we were able to work with them to get them to a deeper place before we even showed up for reauthorization. So it improved programs that were already going there. It shifted the programs that were refusing or choosing not to go there. And we're about to wrap up finally 5 years later. We're just wrapping up this year all of our deep reauthorization processes. So we're anxious to see the data move in the coming years. As far as student achievement, that's always the lagging one, right?
Yeah.
We have initial things around candidates and what districts are doing, but I mean, some districts were using Lucy Calkins last year, our second largest district in the state. We're not going to see student achievement yet. So we don't have that data yet.
Yeah. Well, listen, I'm very upset with my colleague, Kristen, because she only scheduled this for an hour. And I realize she did that to save you guys and your time. But I mean, you have just touched the surface in terms of questions that we have. And so I hope that you will allow us to follow up as we can individually with you. And I am so grateful for what you're doing in your state with regard to increasing the literacy and therefore the potential of those students for a lifetime. And just hope that you will, encourage us along as we likewise are doing that same thing here in the state of Oregon. And the last thing I'll say is come visit us. We have a lovely state, and we welcome you to our state if you're able to come on out. So anyway, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. And we appreciate what you have contributed. You're making a difference for us already with our students in the state of Oregon. Thank you, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care.